3 times I rented a stranger's home. 3 times I learned that some doors should never be opened. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. I am a 91-year-old grandmother now, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the worst invention of the 21st century is not social media or smartphones. It's Airbnb. Hearing something so dramatic from an old woman might not sound pleasant, but let me tell you 3 stories that will make you think twice before trusting a stranger's home. The first happened in October of 2014, when I was 79 years old. My daughter Linda had invited me to Asheville, North Carolina, to celebrate her 50th birthday. She wanted to book me a hotel room, but I insisted on paying my own way. I never wanted to be a burden on my children at any age. I had recently retired from teaching and was living on a fixed income. That's when my granddaughter Emma showed me something called Airbnb, and I was astonished to see that I could rent a house for half the price of a hotel. As you get older, adapting to the new world becomes increasingly difficult. As an old-fashioned person, it made me a little suspicious. But Emma understood these things well, and I trusted her. "Grandma, everyone uses it now," Emma said as she scrolled through listings on her laptop. "Look, this place is only 3 blocks from Mom's house, and it's $60 a night. A hotel would cost twice that." The listing showed a charming brick bungalow with a green front door and white shutters. According to the description, it had been built in 1932. It was an older bungalow, but the listing photos showed hardwood floors, a renovated kitchen, a cozy fireplace, built-in bookshelves, quilted bedspreads, and a clawfoot bathtub. The bungalow had been beautifully restored. The host's name was Patricia Fenimore, a retired librarian like myself, which immediately made me trust her. Patricia had more than 45-star reviews. Guests praised the cleanliness, her quick responses, and a homemade welcome basket filled with local honey and biscuits. One review from a woman around my age read, "Staying at Patricia's home felt like visiting an old friend. Safe, comfortable, and absolutely charming." I booked the place for 5 nights, from October 15th to the 20th. Emma helped me use the app, explaining that the keys would be in a lockbox and how I could message the host if I needed anything. When you reach my age, it's your grandchild who teaches you about the new world. Everything looked wonderfully modern and efficient. I flew to Asheville on Wednesday morning. Linda picked me up from the airport, drove me to Patricia's address on Westwood Place, and helped carry my suitcase up the front steps. The neighborhood was lovely. Tree-lined streets, well-kept homes, children's bicycles on front porches. Exactly the kind of place where you believe nothing bad could ever happen. The lockbox code worked perfectly. Inside, the house matched the photos exactly. Afternoon sunlight streamed through lace curtains. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old books. On the kitchen counter sat the promised welcome basket with a handwritten note. "Dear Margaret, welcome to Asheville. Help yourself to anything in the pantry. The Wi-Fi password is posted on the fridge. Enjoy your stay. Patricia." Linda looked around approvingly. "This is actually really nice, Mom. Much better than some chain hotel." She helped me unpack, showed me how to work the temperamental shower, and made sure I had her number programmed into my phone. Before she left, she paused in the doorway. "You'll call if you need anything, right? Even if it's the middle of the night?" I promised I would, but I was 79 years old, not a child. I'd lived alone for 15 years since my husband Frank passed. I could certainly handle 5 nights in a cozy rental home. The first 2 days were absolutely perfect. I walked to Linda's house for breakfast each morning, spent afternoons exploring the River Arts District, and returned to Patricia's bungalow each evening to read by the fireplace. The house was quiet, the neighborhood peaceful. I felt completely safe. On Friday evening, after dinner with Linda's family, I came back to the bungalow around 9 o'clock. I made myself a cup of tea, changed into my nightgown, and settled into bed with a mystery novel. The bedroom was at the back of the house, overlooking a small fenced yard. Through the window, I could see the neighbor's porch light and hear the distant sound of traffic on Patton Avenue. Around 10:30, I heard a door close somewhere in the house. If you're already feeling uneasy, leave a comment right now and tell me what you think I should have done next. Because at that moment, I truly believed I was alone. Not slam, just a soft click, like someone had pulled it shut carefully. I set my book down and listened. The house was old. Maybe doors closed on their own when the heat kicked on. I waited, hearing nothing else, and went back to reading. 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps. They came from the front of the house, moving slowly across the hardwood floor in the living room. Each step creaked slightly, the way old floors do when weight shifts across them. The footsteps moved toward the kitchen, paused, then continued down what I assumed was the hallway leading to the bathroom. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and opened the Airbnb app with shaking hands. I found Patricia's contact and typed, "Are you in the house? I'm hearing someone walking around." The response came within seconds. "No, I'm at my daughter's in Hendersonville for the week. You should be alone. Are you sure it's not outside?" I typed back, "I'm sure it's inside the house." "Stay in your room and lock the door. I'm calling the police right now." I did exactly that. I turned the old-fashioned skeleton key in the bedroom door lock, pushed a chair against it for good measure, and sat on the bed with the phone clutched in both hands. The footsteps had stopped, but now the silence felt worse. I could hear my own breathing, my own heartbeat. And underneath it all, a sound I couldn't quite identify. A soft scraping, rhythmic and steady, coming from somewhere toward the front of the house. 8 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed across the bedroom ceiling. I heard car doors slam, voices outside, then heavy knocking on the front door. "Asheville Police! Anyone inside? Make yourself known." I waited, barely breathing. The chair scraped as I moved it aside, turned the key with trembling fingers, and opened the bedroom door just a crack. Through the hallway, I could see flashlight beams sweeping across the living room. "Ma'am," a woman's voice called out. "Margaret Walsh? Are you here?" "I'm here," I called back, my voice thin and shaky. "In the back bedroom." 2 officers came down the hallway, a woman in her 40s and a younger man with his hand resting on his holster. The woman introduced herself as Officer Ramirez and asked if I'd seen anyone. "No," I said. "I only heard footsteps and a scraping sound." Officer Ramirez nodded to her partner, who began searching the other rooms while she stayed with me. I heard him open closets, check the bathroom, look under beds. After a few minutes, he called out from the front of the house. "Ramirez, you need to see this." We walked together through the living room to the kitchen. On the far wall, next to the refrigerator, was a door I'd barely noticed before. I'd assumed it was a pantry. The door stood open now, revealing a set of wooden stairs descending into darkness. "The basement," Officer Ramirez said quietly. "Was this door open when you arrived?" I shook my head. "I don't think so. I never went near it." Her partner aimed his flashlight down the stairs. "Someone's been down there." They made me wait in the living room while both officers descended into the basement. I heard their footsteps, their voices echoing in the space below, the creak of pipes and old wood. After what felt like an eternity, they came back up. Officer Ramirez's expression was grim. "Mrs. Walsh, you need to pack your things. You can't stay here tonight." "What did you find?" I whispered. She glanced at her partner before answering. "Someone's been living in the basement. There's a cot, food wrappers, personal items, and tools, locks, picks, a pry bar, and a set of knives." My legs nearly gave out. She caught my arm and helped me sit on the couch. "The basement door doesn't lock from the outside," she continued. "Anyone with access to the crawl space entrance in the backyard could get in. We're going to need to secure this property and contact the owner." The younger officer was already on his radio, calling for additional units. Officer Ramirez sat beside me, her voice calm and professional, despite what they'd just discovered. "Do you have somewhere you can stay tonight? Family nearby?" I nodded, fumbling for my phone to call Linda. My daughter arrived within 15 minutes, her face pale with worry. By then, 3 more police cars had arrived, and the house was being treated as a crime scene. Officers were photographing the basement, bagging evidence, dusting for fingerprints. A detective named Morrison took my statement. He was in his 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. He asked detailed questions about every sound I'd heard, every movement, every minute of the evening. "The footsteps stopped when?" he asked, pen poised over his notepad. "Right before I messaged Patricia. Maybe 10:40. He wrote that down. "And you didn't see anyone leave the house?" "No, I stayed in the bedroom with the door locked until your officers arrived." Detective Morrison nodded slowly. "Whoever was here either left through the basement crawl space when they heard sirens, or they're still hiding somewhere in the neighborhood. We've got units canvassing the area now." Linda's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Mom, get your things. You're staying with us for the rest of the trip." I packed quickly, shoving clothes into my suitcase with shaking hands. As we left, I looked back at the charming brick bungalow with its green door and white shutters. In the harsh glare of police lights, it looked different somehow. Violated, sinister, a place that had been harboring something dark underneath its cozy exterior. Patricia called me the next morning, sobbing apologies. She'd had no idea anyone had been accessing the basement. The crawl space door was hidden behind overgrown bushes in the backyard, secured with a simple padlock that someone had apparently cut through weeks or even months earlier. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I've been renting this house for 3 years. Nothing like this has ever happened. I feel sick thinking about what could have." I told her it wasn't her fault, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her what Detective Morrison had shared with me before I left that night. They'd found journals in the basement, dozens of them, filled with handwritten entries documenting every guest who'd stayed in Patricia's home over the past 18 months. Arrival times, departure times, habits, schedules, whether they traveled alone, whether they locked their bedroom doors. My name was in the most recent journal. Margaret Walsh, arrived October 15th, elderly, alone, bedroom rear of house, does not lock door. But he'd been wrong about that last part. I had locked my door. Detective Morrison said that probably saved my life. They caught him 2 days later, a man named Dennis Kowalski, arrested trying to break into another Airbnb rental on the east side of Asheville. In his backpack, they found the journals, lockpicks, zip ties, and a knife with an 8-inch blade. He'd been homeless since losing his job as a maintenance worker 2 years earlier. He'd figured out that Airbnb properties were easy targets, often empty between bookings, keys hidden in predictable places, owners who lived elsewhere and rarely checked on the property. He'd been living in the crawl spaces and basements of vacation rentals all over Asheville, occasionally entering the homes at night when guests were asleep. Most of the time, he just watched, took food from the kitchen, used the bathroom, then retreated back underground before dawn. But investigators found evidence suggesting he'd done more than watch. There were Polaroid photographs hidden in his belongings, pictures of women sleeping, taken from doorways in the darkness. None of the women knew they'd been photographed. None of them knew he'd been standing there. I was one of the lucky ones. I'd heard him. I'd locked my door. I'd called for help. The others, and there were at least 15 that police identified, had slept through his visits without ever knowing danger had been inches away from their beds. Linda wanted me to cancel the rest of my visit and fly home immediately, but I refused. I wouldn't let fear win. I stayed the remaining 3 nights at her house, celebrated her birthday, and flew back to Vermont as planned. But I never used Airbnb again. And whenever I travel now, I stay in hotels with security guards, surveillance cameras, and multiple locks on the doors. Because I learned something that October in Asheville. I learned that charming and safe are just words in a listing. That 5-star reviews can't tell you what's hidden in the basement. And that sometimes the worst monsters aren't the ones who break down your door. They're the ones who've been living underneath you all along, just waiting for you to forget to turn that lock. The second Airbnb horror I need to tell you about happened 3 years later, in the spring of 2017, when I was 82 years old. You would think I should have learned my lesson after what happened in Asheville. But time has a way of dulling fear, and my grandson Thomas had just graduated from UC Berkeley. Attending his ceremony was very important to me. I couldn't leave my grandson alone on such a day. Thomas had found what he called the perfect place for me to stay. "Grandma, this host has more than 200 5-star reviews," Thomas said, showing me the listing on his iPad during our weekly video call. "Look, Susan is the most attentive host I've ever had. She thinks of everything. It felt like staying with family." Thomas read the reviews aloud, trying to reassure me. But after my first experience, I was no longer easily convinced by them. The rental was a garden cottage behind Susan Merrick's main house in Oakland, just 20 minutes from the Berkeley campus. In the photos, the cottage was painted a cheerful yellow, with flower boxes full of geraniums beneath the windows, a private entrance, and a small kitchen. Susan's profile picture showed a woman in her mid-50s with short silver hair and a warm smile. Her bio said she was a retired nurse who loved hosting travelers and sharing her knowledge of the Bay Area. "She even offers to make breakfast for guests," Thomas added. "Isn't that sweet?" I should have made a better decision, but I booked the place for 4 nights. Thomas picked me up from SFO on a Tuesday afternoon in late May, and we drove across the Bay Bridge into Oakland. Susan's home was in the Rock Ridge neighborhood, full of tree-lined streets and well-kept craftsman-style houses. The main house was a lovely 2-story with a wraparound porch, and behind it, connected by a stone path, was the yellow cottage. Susan came out to greet us before we'd even parked the car. She was wearing a flowing floral dress and had the same warm smile from her profile photo. She hugged me as if we were old friends, insisted on carrying my suitcase, and gave me a detailed tour of the cottage, pointing out every amenity. There was an unnecessary level of friendliness about her, but I liked it, and some of the tension inside me eased. "There are fresh towels in the bathroom cabinet," she said, opening doors to show me. "Extra blankets are in the closet. The Wi-Fi password is on the fridge. And here," she handed me a laminated card, "my personal cell phone number. If you need anything at all, you can call me anytime, day or night." She'd left a welcome basket on the counter with fruit, crackers, cheese, and a handwritten note. "Dear Margaret, I'm so honored to host you during this special time. Please make yourself at home. Breakfast is at 8 a.m. if you'd like to join me in the main house." "Susan," Thomas whispered to me after she left, "see? I told you she was perfect." And for the first 2 days, she was. I attended Thomas's graduation ceremony on Wednesday, took him and his friends out for a celebratory dinner, and returned to the cottage each evening to find small touches of hospitality. Fresh flowers on the nightstand, chocolates on my pillow, a note asking if I needed anything. On Thursday morning, I accepted Susan's invitation for breakfast. She'd set a beautiful table on her back porch with fresh squeezed orange juice, homemade scones, and scrambled eggs with herbs from her garden. We talked for over an hour about our careers in healthcare. She'd been an ER nurse for 30 years before retiring. She asked thoughtful questions about my family, my life in Vermont, my late husband Frank. "You must be so proud of Thomas," she said, refilling my coffee cup. "A Berkeley graduate. That's quite an accomplishment." I was proud, and I was grateful to Susan for making my visit so comfortable. When I returned to the cottage around 10, I sent her a message through the Airbnb app. "Thank you for the lovely breakfast. You're a wonderful host." Her response came immediately. "The pleasure is all mine. Having you here has been such a joy." That afternoon, while Thomas was packing up his apartment, I decided to take a nap. I'd been up early for the graduation ceremony, and the days were catching up with me. I drew the curtains in the cottage bedroom, set an alarm for 3 o'clock, and lay down. I woke to the sound of breathing. Not my own, someone else's. Soft, steady breaths coming from somewhere very close. My eyes snapped open, but the room was dark behind the closed curtains. I lay perfectly still, my heart hammering, trying to locate the source of the sound. It was coming from beside the bed. I turned my head slowly, and in the dim light filtering around the curtain edges, I saw her. Susan was standing next to my bed, maybe 3 feet away, just watching me sleep. She wasn't doing anything threatening, just standing there with her hands clasped in front of her, smiling that same warm smile. I jerked upright with a gasp. "Susan, what are you? How did you get in here?" She didn't seem startled or embarrassed. "Oh, I'm so sorry if I frightened you, dear. I knocked, but you didn't answer, and I wanted to make sure you were all right. You seemed tired at breakfast, and at your age. Sometimes a nap can turn into something more serious. My age. The words hung in the air between us. "I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you can't just come into the cottage while I'm sleeping. I need privacy." Her smile never wavered. Of course. I completely understand. I just worry, living alone, hosting guests. You become responsible for their well-being. What if something had happened to you? What if you'd fallen or had a medical emergency? She had a point, I supposed, but something about the situation felt deeply wrong. How long had she been standing there? And why hadn't I heard her come in? "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm perfectly healthy. If I need help, I have your number." "You're absolutely right," Susan backed toward the door. "I'll let you rest. But Margaret," she paused with her hand on the doorknob, "please don't hesitate to call if you need anything. I'm always nearby." The way she said, "always nearby," sent a chill down my spine. After she left, I got out of bed and checked the cottage door. It was unlocked. I was certain I'd locked it before my nap, but perhaps I'd been too tired to remember. I turned the deadbolt firmly and wedged a chair under the doorknob for good measure. I called Thomas, but he was in the middle of moving and couldn't talk. "Is everything okay, Grandma?" he asked, sounding distracted. I almost told him what had happened, but what would I say? That Susan had checked on me during my nap? It sounded ridiculous when I tried to put it into words. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she really was just being a concerned host. "Everything's fine," I said. "I'll see you for dinner." But everything wasn't fine. That evening, I noticed things I hadn't paid attention to before. The cottage had large windows on all sides, and Susan's main house had a perfect view of every single one. From her second-floor bedroom window, she could see directly into my cottage, into the living area, the kitchenette, even the bedroom if the curtains weren't fully closed. At dinner with Thomas and his friends, I kept checking my phone. Susan had sent me 3 messages in 2 hours. "Just checking that you're comfortable. Let me know if you need recommendations for dinner. Hope you're having a lovely evening." Thomas noticed my distraction. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I lied. "Just tired." When I returned to the cottage around 9 o'clock, I found that Susan had been inside again. Fresh towels sat folded on the bed. Towels I hadn't asked for and didn't need. A new welcome basket sat on the counter with a note. "Thought you might enjoy some evening tea. Sleep well, Susan." My hands shook as I checked every room, every closet, every space large enough for someone to hide. The cottage was empty, but I felt violated. I'd locked that door. I knew I had. I looked up at Susan's main house. Lights glowed in the upstairs windows. Was she watching me now? Could she see me standing here, looking up at her? I closed every curtain in the cottage and pushed furniture against both the front and back doors. Then I sat on the couch with my phone in my hand, debating whether to call Thomas and ask him to come get me. But it was late, and he'd been drinking with his friends. I couldn't ask him to drive. Around midnight, I heard the back door handle rattle. Not turn, just rattle slightly, like someone was testing whether it was locked. I held my breath, staring at the door. The chair I'd wedged underneath held firm. After a moment, the rattling stopped. Then came a soft knock. "Margaret?" Susan's voice, muffled through the wood. "Are you awake? I saw your lights on and wanted to make sure you're comfortable." I didn't answer, didn't move, barely breathed. "Margaret, I have some warm milk that might help you sleep. I know how difficult it can be to rest in a new place at your age." At your age? There it was again. "Margaret, I can hear you moving around. Please, let me in. I just want to help." How could she hear me? I wasn't moving at all. Unless... I looked around the cottage with new eyes and spotted them. Small white devices in the corners of the ceiling, near the smoke detectors. I'd assumed they were part of the security system Susan had mentioned. But now I realized what they actually were. Cameras, or microphones, or both. If this just changed how you see Airbnb forever, press like, and don't look away yet. She'd been watching me, listening to me, this entire time. My phone was in my hand before I'd consciously decided to call. I dialed 911, and when the dispatcher answered, I kept my voice low and steady. "I'm being held in an Airbnb rental, and the host won't leave me alone. She keeps entering without permission and is now trying to get in while I'm barricaded inside." The dispatcher stayed on the line with me, asking for the address, confirming I was safe behind the locked door. Through the window, I could see Susan had moved to the front of the cottage. She was just standing there in her nightgown, looking at the door, smiling. "Margaret, you're overreacting," she called out. "I'm just trying to be a good host. Don't do something you'll regret." The police arrived within 8 minutes, 2 patrol cars with lights flashing. I watched from the window as Susan transformed instantly, putting on a confused, concerned expression as she spoke to the officers. She gestured at the cottage, at the main house, shaking her head like this was all a terrible misunderstanding. One officer came to the cottage door. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Park. Are you Margaret Walsh?" I moved the chair and opened the door. Officer Park was a young Asian woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I told her everything. Susan watching me sleep, entering without permission, the constant messages, the devices in the ceiling, the door rattling at midnight. She took notes carefully, then asked, "Do you have proof of the cameras?" I pointed at the ceiling. Officer Park's expression darkened. She radioed her partner, and within minutes, they were both examining the devices. Susan watched from her porch, arms crossed, no longer smiling. "Mrs. Merrick," Officer Park called out, "do you have recording devices in this rental unit?" "Of course," Susan said, as if it was the most reasonable thing in the world. For security purposes, it's in the rental agreement. But when Officer Park pulled up my Airbnb booking on her tablet, there was no mention of cameras or recording devices anywhere in the listing. In fact, Airbnb's policy explicitly required hosts to disclose all surveillance equipment. The officers asked me to wait outside while they searched the cottage. What they found made my blood run cold. The devices weren't just cameras. They were audio and video monitors connected to a system in Susan's house. She could watch and listen to everything that happened in the cottage, 24 hours a day. They also found something else, a detailed journal in Susan's main house, documenting every guest who'd stayed in the cottage over the past 3 years. What time they went to bed, how long they showered, what they ate, who they called. Pages and pages of observations about people who thought they had privacy. Many of the entries focused on elderly guests traveling alone. Susan had written assessments of their health, their mobility, their cognitive function. Next to some names were notes like potential candidate or needs more time. Next to my name, written just that morning, were the words, perfect candidate, beginning assessment protocol. Officer Park's partner, a veteran named Rodriguez, pulled me aside while his colleague interviewed Susan. Mrs. Walsh, I think you should know, we've been looking for a pattern of elder exploitation in this area. Financial scams targeting older travelers. Nothing we could prove, but multiple reports of elderly tourists befriending local women who later gained access to their bank accounts or convinced them to change their wills. My throat went dry. You think Susan was trying to? I don't know yet. But that journal suggests she was building towards something. Getting close to you, establishing trust, documenting everything about your routines and vulnerabilities. They arrested Susan that night on charges of illegal surveillance and harassment. A deeper investigation over the following weeks uncovered her full operation. She'd been targeting elderly solo travelers using the cottage as a way to observe and assess them. If they seemed vulnerable or wealthy enough, she'd befriend them, gain their trust, and eventually manipulate them into financial arrangements. 2 previous guests had signed over power of attorney to Susan after extended stays. Another had changed her will to leave Susan a substantial inheritance, then died under suspicious circumstances that were being reinvestigated. Bank records showed thousands of dollars transferred from elderly guests' accounts to Susan's. The retired nurse with the warm smile and 5-star reviews had been running a predatory operation for years, and Airbnb's platform had given her the perfect hunting ground. I flew home to Vermont the next day, 2 days earlier than planned. Thomas felt horrible, blaming himself for booking the cottage. I told him it wasn't his fault. Susan had fooled hundreds of guests before me. The reviews were real. She just hadn't chosen those guests as targets. But I learned something important that week in Oakland. I learned that monsters don't always hide in basements or lurk in shadows. Sometimes they smile warmly, make you breakfast, and call you dear while documenting your every move and planning how to exploit your trust. The last thing Officer Park told me still haunts me. You were lucky you woke up when you did. Most of Susan's victims never realized she was in their rooms while they slept. They never knew she was watching. They trusted her right up until they signed over everything they had. I was lucky, but 15 other elderly travelers weren't. And I wonder how many more Susans are out there, hiding behind welcoming smiles and perfect reviews, just waiting for the right vulnerable guest to come along. The third and final Airbnb story I need to tell you happened just 2 years ago, in the fall of 2022, when I was 87 years old. After everything I'd been through, you'd think I would have sworn off vacation rentals forever. But my great-granddaughter Sophie was getting married in Charleston, South Carolina, and every hotel within 20 miles was completely booked. "Grandma, it's wedding season," Sophie explained over the phone. "But I found one Airbnb with availability. It's a private room in someone's home, not a whole place. But the host seems nice, and it's only 10 minutes from the venue." A private room meant sharing common spaces with the host. I didn't like that idea, but Sophie was my favorite great-grandchild, and I wasn't going to miss her wedding over accommodation concerns. The host's name was David Brennan, a 40-year-old pharmacist, according to his profile. His home was a renovated Charleston single house with high ceilings and original hardwood floors. The listing showed a guest bedroom on the second floor with its own bathroom. David's reviews were generally positive, though one caught my attention. David was pleasant, but I felt he was around a bit too much. Just a personal preference. I booked 3 nights and flew into Charleston on a Thursday afternoon. Sophie picked me up and drove me to David's address on Rutledge Avenue. The house was beautiful, pale blue with white trim and a wide front porch. David answered the door in scrubs, apparently just home from work. "Margaret, welcome," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Let me show you to your room." He carried my suitcase upstairs to a spacious bedroom with a 4-poster bed and windows overlooking the street. Everything was clean and well-maintained. David showed me where the bathroom was, explained that the kitchen was available any time, and mentioned he worked 12-hour shifts, so I'd have the house to myself most days. "I'm usually gone by 6 in the morning and back around 7 at night," he said. "But I'm off this weekend for some family thing, so I'll be around. Just let me know if you need anything." That evening, I attended the wedding rehearsal dinner with Sophie's family. When I returned to David's house around 10, the lights were on, but he was nowhere to be seen. I went upstairs, changed for bed, and was asleep within minutes. I woke at 2:47 a.m. to my bedroom door opening. The hallway light was on, and David's silhouette filled the doorway. He just stood there, not moving, not speaking. I sat up quickly, my heart racing. "David, what's wrong?" He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, in a flat voice, "I sleepwalk sometimes. Sorry." He closed the door, and I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. I got up immediately and turned the old-fashioned key in the bedroom door lock. My hands were shaking. Sleepwalking. Was that really what I'd just witnessed? Or was it something else? I barely slept the rest of the night. Every creak of the house made me jump. At dawn, I heard David moving around downstairs, then the front door closing as he left for work. I waited 30 minutes before going down to the kitchen. On the counter was a note. "Margaret, so sorry about last night. I have a sleep disorder and sometimes wander. Didn't mean to scare you. Coffee's ready." I wanted to pack my bags and leave, but Sophie's wedding was that afternoon, and I had nowhere else to go. I spent the day at the wedding venue, helping with last-minute preparations and attending the ceremony. It was beautiful. Sophie looked radiant, and I pushed thoughts of David and his nighttime wandering out of my mind. I stayed at the reception until nearly 11, dancing with my grandson and eating too much cake. When Sophie's husband offered to drive me back to David's house, I accepted gratefully. I didn't want to arrive alone in the dark. The house was dark when we pulled up. No lights on anywhere. Sophie's husband walked me to the door and waited while I unlocked it. "You sure you're okay here, Grandma?" he asked. I assured him I was fine, but as soon as his car disappeared down the street, I regretted sending him away. The house felt different in the darkness, bigger somehow, full of shadows and unfamiliar sounds. I climbed the stairs quietly, unlocked my bedroom door, and stepped inside. Then I froze. Someone had been in my room. My suitcase had been moved. I'd left it by the window, and now it sat at the foot of the bed, partially unzipped. The clothes I'd laid out that morning were rearranged, and on my pillow sat my phone, which I distinctly remembered leaving in my purse downstairs. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the phone and saw I had a new text message from an unknown number. "I know you're scared, but I'm not going to hurt you. I just wanted to know more about you. The pictures on your phone are beautiful. Your family is lovely." Someone had gone through my phone, through my photos, my messages, my entire life. And there was only one person it could be. I didn't waste time. I threw my belongings into the suitcase, not bothering to fold anything. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard it, breathing from the dark living room. He was in the house. He'd been here the whole time, waiting in the darkness while I walked right past him. "Margaret," David's voice came from the shadows. "You don't need to leave. I was just curious about you. You're so interesting. All those places you've lived, all those stories you must have." I ran, out the front door, down the porch steps, into the middle of Rutledge Avenue. I stood under a streetlight and called 911 with shaking hands. A police car arrived within 5 minutes, and I told them everything. They found David sitting calmly in his living room, acting confused about why I was upset. But when they searched his bedroom, they found a problem. He had cameras, small wireless cameras, hidden in the guest room, smoke detector, and bathroom air vent. He'd been watching his guests for months, maybe years. On his computer were folders full of photos downloaded from guests' phones while they slept or were out. Hundreds of images of strangers' lives, stolen and cataloged like trophies. I spent that final night in a real hotel that Sophie paid for. David was arrested and his Airbnb listing immediately removed. I later learned that 3 other former guests came forward with similar stories after seeing the news coverage. I flew home to Vermont the next morning and told myself I was done. Done with Airbnb, done with trusting strangers, done with believing that a good review meant anything at all. These 3 stories, the man in the basement, the woman who watched me sleep, and the host who stole my pictures, taught me one final lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous place you can be is inside someone else's home, behind a locked door that they have the key to. I'm 91 years old now, and I only stay with family or in hotels with security guards, because I've learned that strangers' homes come with secrets, and some secrets are waiting for you to close your eyes before they reveal themselves. If you've made it to the end, you're braver than most. Subscribe for more real horror stories. Leave a comment telling me which story scared you the most. And remember, sometimes the scariest place isn't outside in the dark. It's inside a stranger's home.